Smoke and Mirrors by Neil Gaiman. First story is called Nicholas Was older than sin, and his beard could grow no wider. He wanted to die. The dwarfish natives of the Arctic caverns did not speak his language, but conversed in their own twittering tongue, conducted incomprehensible rituals when they were not actually working in the factories. Once every year, they forced him, sobbing and protesting, into endless night. During the journey, he would stand near every child in the world, leave one of the dwarf's invisible gifts by its bedside. The children slept, frozen into time. He envied Prometheus, Loki, Sisyphus, and Judas. His punishment was harsher. Ho, ho, ho. The price. Tramps and vagabonds have marks they make on gateposts and trees and doors, letting others of their kind know a little about the people who live at the houses and farms they pass on their travels. I think cats must leave similar signs. How else to explain the cats who turn up at our door through the year, hungry and flea-ridden and abandoned? We take them in, we get rid of the fleas and the ticks, feed them and take them to the vet. We pay for them to get their shots, and indignity upon indignity, we have them neutered or spayed. And they stay with us for a few months or for a year or forever. Most of them arrive in summer. We live in the country, just the right distance out of town for the city dwellers to abandon their cats near us. We never seem to have more than 8 cats, rarely have less than 3. The cat population in my house is currently as follows: Hermione and Pod, Tabby and Black respectively, the mad sisters who live in my attic office and do not mingle. Snowflake, the blue-eyed, long-haired white cat, who lived wild in the woods for years before she gave up her wild ways for soft sofas and beds. And last but largest, Furball, Snowflake's cushion-like calico long-haired daughter, orange and black and white, whom I discovered as a tiny kitten in our garage one day, strangled and almost dead, her head poked through an old badminton net, and who surprised us all by not dying, but instead growing up to be the best-natured cat I have ever encountered. And then there is the black cat, who has no other name than the black cat, and who turned up almost a month ago. We did not realize he was going to be living here at first. He looked too well fed to be a stray, too old and jaunty to have been abandoned. He looked like a small panther, and he moved like a patch of night. One day in the summer, he was lurking about our ramshackle porch, 8 or 9 years old at a guess, male, greenish yellow of eye, very friendly, quite unperturbable. I assumed he belonged to a neighboring farmer or household. I went away for a few weeks to finish writing a book, and when I came home he was still on our porch, living in an old cat bed one of the children had found for him. He was, however, almost unrecognizable. Patches of fur had gone, and there were deep scratches on his gray skin. The tip of one ear was chewed away. There was a gash beneath one eye, a slice gone from one lip. He looked tired and thin. We took the black cat to the vet, where we got him some antibiotics, which we fed to him each night, along with soft cat food. We wondered who he was fighting. Snowflake, our beautiful, white, near-feral queen? Raccoons? A rat-tailed, fanged possum? Each night the scratches would be worse. One night his side would be chewed up. The next it would be his underbelly, raked with claw marks and bloody to the touch. When it got to that point, I took him down to the basement to recover beside the furnace and the piles of boxes. He was surprisingly heavy, the black cat, and I picked him up and carried him down there with a cat basket and a litter box and some food and water. I closed the door behind me. I had to wash the blood from my hands when I left the basement. He stayed down there for 4 days. At first, he seemed too weak to feed himself. A cut beneath one eye had rendered him almost one-eyed, and he limped and lolled weakly, thick yellow pus oozing from the cut in his lip. I went down there every morning and every night, and I fed him and gave him antibiotics, which I mixed with his canned food, and I dabbed at the worst of the cuts and spoke to him. He had diarrhea, and although I changed his litter daily, the basement stank evil. The 4 days that the black cat lived in the basement were a bad 4 days in my house. The baby slipped in the bath and banged her head and might have drowned. I learned that a project I had set my heart on, adapting Hope Merle's novel Blood in the Mist for the BBC, was no longer going to happen, and I realized that I did not have the energy to begin again from scratch, pitching it to other networks or to other media. My daughter left for summer camp and immediately began to send home a plethora of heart-tearing letters and cards, 5 or 6 each day, imploring us to bring her home. My son had some kind of fight with his best friend, to the point that they were no longer on speaking terms, and returning home one night, my wife hit a deer that ran out in front of the car. The deer was killed, the car was left undrivable, and my wife sustained a small cut over one eye. By the 4th day, the cat was prowling the basement, walking haltingly but impatiently between the stacks of books and comics, the boxes of mail and cassettes, of pictures and of gifts and of stuff. He mewed at me to let him out, and reluctantly I did so. He went back onto the porch and slept there for the rest of the day. The next morning, there were deep new gashes in his flanks, and clumps of black cat hair, his, covered the wooden boards of the porch. Letters arrived that day from my daughter, telling us that camp was going better, and she thought she could survive a few days. My son and his friends sorted out their problem, although what the argument was about, trading cards, computer games, Star Wars, or a girl, I would never learn. The BBC executive who had vetoed Blood in the Mist was discovered to have been taking bribes, well, questionable loans, from an independent production company and was sent home on permanent leave. His successor, I was delighted to learn when she faxed me, was the woman who had initially proposed the project to me before leaving the BBC. I thought about returning the black cat to the basement, but decided against it. Instead, I resolved to try and discover what kind of animal was coming to our house each night, and from there, to formulate a plan of action to trap it, perhaps. For birthdays and at Christmas, my family gives me gadgets and gizmos, pricey toys which excite my fancy but ultimately rarely leave their boxes. There is a food dehydrator and an electric carving knife, a bread-making machine, and last year's present, a pair of see-in-the-dark binoculars. On Christmas Day, I'd put the batteries into the binoculars and had walked about the basement in the dark, too impatient even to wait until nightfall, stalking a flock of imaginary starlings. You were warned not to turn it on in the light. That would have damaged the binoculars, and quite possibly your eyes as well. Afterward, I'd put the device back into its box, and it sat there still in my office, beside the box of computer cables and forgotten bits and pieces. Perhaps, I thought, if the creature, a dog or cat or raccoon or what have you, were to see me sitting on the porch, it would not come. So I took the chair into the box and coat room, little larger than a closet, which overlooks the porch, and when everyone in the house was asleep, I went out onto the porch and bade the black cat good night. The cat, my wife had said when he first arrived, is a person, and there was something very person-like in his huge leonine face, his broad black nose, his greenish-yellow eyes, his fanged but amiable mouth, still leaking amber pus from the right lower lip. I stroked his head and scratched him beneath the chin and wished him well. Then I went inside and turned off the light on the porch. I sat on my chair in the darkness inside the house with the see-in-the-dark binoculars on my lap. I had switched the binoculars on, and a trickle of greenish light came from the eyepieces. Time passed in the darkness. I experimented with looking at the darkness with the binoculars, learning to focus, to see the world in shades of green. I found myself horrified by the number of swarming insects I could see in the night air. It was as if the night world were some kind of nightmarish soup swimming with life. Then I lowered the binoculars from my eyes and stared out at the rich blacks and blues of the night, empty and peaceful and calm. Time passed. I struggled to keep awake, found myself profoundly missing cigarettes and coffee, my two lost addictions. Either of them would have kept my eyes open. But before I had tumbled too far into the world of sleep and dreams, a yowl from the garden jerked me fully awake. I fumbled the binoculars to my eyes and was disappointed to see that it was merely Snowflake, the white cat, streaking across the front garden like a patch of greenish-white light. She vanished into the woodland to the left of the house and was gone. I was about to settle myself back down when it occurred to me to wonder what exactly had startled Snowflake so, and I began scanning the middle distance with the binoculars, looking for a huge raccoon, a dog, or a vicious possum. And there was indeed something coming down the driveway toward the house. I could see it through the binoculars, clear as day. It was the devil. I had never seen the devil before, and although I had written about him in the past, if pressed, would have confessed that I had no belief in him, other than as an imaginary figure, tragic and Miltonian. The figure coming up the driveway was not Milton's Lucifer. It was the devil. My heart began to pound in my chest, to pound so hard that it hurt. I hoped it could not see me, that in a dark house behind window glass, I was hidden. The figure flickered and changed as it walked up the drive. One moment it was dark, bull-like, minotaurish. The next it was slim and female, and the next it was a cat itself, a scarred, huge, gray-green wildcat, its face contorted with hate. There are steps that lead up to my porch, 4 white wooden steps in need of a coat of paint. I knew they were white, although they were, like everything else, green through my binoculars. At the bottom of the steps, the devil stopped and called out something that I could not understand. 3, perhaps 4 words in a whining, howling language that must have been old and forgotten when Babylon was young. And although I did not understand the words, I felt the hairs raise on the back of my head as it called. And then I heard, muffled through the glass, but still audible, a low growl, a challenge, and slowly, unsteadily, a black figure walked down the steps of the house away from me, toward the devil. These days, the black cat no longer moved like a panther. Instead, he stumbled and rocked like a sailor only recently returned to land. The devil was a woman now. She said something soothing and gentle to the cat in a tongue that sounded like French and reached out a hand for him. He sank his teeth into her arm and her lip curled and she spat at him. The woman glanced up at me then, and if I had doubted that she was the devil before, I was certain of it now. The woman's eyes flashed red fire at me, but you can see no red through the night vision binoculars, only shades of green. And the devil saw me through the window. It saw me. I am in no doubt about that at all. The devil twisted and writhed, and now it was some kind of jackal, a flat-faced, huge-headed, bull-necked creature halfway between a hyena and a dingo. There were maggots squirming in its mangy fur, and it began to walk up the steps. The black cat leapt upon it, and in seconds they became a rolling, writhing thing, moving faster than my eyes could follow. All this in silence. And then a low roar. Down the country road at the bottom of our drive, in the distance, lumbered a late-night truck, its blazing headlights burning bright as green suns through the binoculars. I lowered them from my eyes and saw only darkness and the gentle yellow of headlights, and then the red of rear lights as it vanished off again into the nowhere at all. When I raised the binoculars once more, there was nothing to be seen. Only the black cat on the steps, staring up into the air. I trained the binoculars up and saw something flying away. A vulture, perhaps, or an eagle, and then it flew beyond the trees and was gone. I went out onto the porch and picked up the black cat and stroked him and said kind, soothing things to him. He mewed piteously when I first approached him, but after a while he went to sleep on my lap, and I put him into his basket and went upstairs to my bed to sleep myself. There was dried blood on my t-shirt and jeans the following morning. That was a week ago. The thing that comes to my house does not come every night, but it comes most nights. We know it by the wounds on the cat and the pain I can see in those leonine eyes. He has lost the use of his front left paw, and his right eye is closed for good. I wonder what we did to deserve the black cat. I wonder who sent him. And selfish and scared, I wonder how much more he has to give. Trollbridge. They pulled up most of the railway tracks in the early 60s when I was 3 or 4. They slashed the train service to ribbons. This meant that there was nowhere to go but London, and the little town where I lived became the end of the line. My earliest reliable memory, 18 months old, my mother away in the hospital having my sister, and my grandmother walking with me down to a bridge and lifting me up to watch the train below, panting and steaming like a black iron dragon. Over the next few years, they lost the last of the steam trains, and with them went the network of railways that joined village to village, town to town. I didn't know that the trains were going. By the time I was 7, they were a thing of the past. We lived in an old house on the outskirts of the town. The fields opposite were empty and fallow. I used to climb the fence and lie in the shade of a small bulrush patch and read. Or if I were feeling more adventurous, I explored the grounds of the empty manor beyond the fields. It had a weed-clogged ornamental pond with a low wooden bridge over it. I never saw any groundsmen or caretakers in my forays through the gardens and woods, and I never attempted to enter the manor. That would have been courting disaster. And besides, it was a matter of faith for me that all empty old houses were haunted. It is not that I was credulous, simply that I believed in all things dark and dangerous. It was part of my young creed that the night was full of ghosts and witches, hungry and flapping and dressed completely in black. The converse held reassuringly true. Daylight was safe. Daylight was always safe. A ritual. On the last day of the summer school term, walking home from school, I would remove my shoes and socks, and carrying them in my hands, walk down the stony, flinty lane on pink and tender feet. During the summer holiday, I would put shoes on only under duress. I would revel in my freedom from footwear until the school term began once more in September. When I was 7, I discovered the path through the wood. It was summer, hot and bright, and I wandered a long way from home that day. I was exploring. I went past the manor, its windows boarded up and blind, across the grounds and through some unfamiliar woods. I scrambled down a steep bank, and I found myself on a shady path that was new to me and overgrown with trees. The light that penetrated the leaves was stained green and gold, and I thought I was in fairyland. A little stream trickled down the side of the path, teeming with tiny transparent shrimps. I picked them up and watched them jerk and spin on my fingertips. Then I put them back. I wandered down the path. It was perfectly straight and overgrown with short grass. From time to time, I would find these really terrific rocks, bubbly, melted things, brown and purple and black. If you held them up to the light, you could see every color of the rainbow. I was convinced that they had to be extremely valuable and stuffed my pockets with them. I walked and walked down the quiet golden green corridor and saw no one. I wasn't hungry or thirsty. I just wondered where the path was going. It traveled in a straight line and was perfectly flat. The path never changed, but the countryside around it did. At first, I was walking along the bottom of a ravine, grassy banks climbing steeply on each side of me. Later, the path was above everything, and as I walked, I could look down at the treetops below me and the roofs of occasional distant houses. My path was always flat and straight, and I walked along it through valleys and plateaus, and eventually, in one of the valleys, I came to a bridge. It was built of clean red brick, a huge curving arch over the path. At the side of the bridge were stone steps cut into the embankment, and at the top of the steps, a little wooden gate. I was surprised to see any token of the existence of humanity on my path, which I was by now convinced was a natural formation, like a volcano. And with a sense more of curiosity than anything else, I had, after all, walked hundreds of miles or so. I was convinced it might be anywhere. I climbed the stone steps and went through the gate. I was nowhere. The top of the bridge was paved with mud. On each side of it was a meadow. The meadow on my side was a wheat field. The other field was just grass. There were the caked imprints of huge tractor wheels in the dried mud. I walked across the bridge to be sure. No trip-trap with my bare feet were soundless. No trip-trap, my bare feet were soundless. Nothing for miles, just fields of wheat and trees. I picked an ear of wheat and pulled out the sweet grains, peeling them between my fingers, chewing them meditatively. I realized then that I was getting hungry and went back down the stairs to the abandoned railway track. It was time to go home. I was not lost. All I needed to do was follow my path home once more. There was a troll waiting for me under the bridge. "I'm a troll," he said. Then he paused and added, more or less as an afterthought, "Full roll, dual roll." He was huge. His head brushed the top of the brick arch. He was more or less translucent. I could see the bricks and trees behind him, dimmed but not lost. He was all my nightmares given flesh. He had huge, strong teeth and rending claws, and strong, hairy hands. His hair was long, like one of my sister's plastic gonks, and his eyes bulged. He was naked, and his penis hung from the bush of gonk hair between his legs. "I heard you, Jack," he whispered in a voice like the wind. "I heard you trip-trapping over my bridge, and now I'm going to eat your life." I was only 7, but it was daylight, and I do not remember being scared. It is good for children to find themselves facing the elements of a fairy tale. They are well equipped to deal with these. "Don't eat me," I said to the troll. I was wearing a stripy brown t-shirt and brown corduroy trousers. My hair also was brown, and I was missing a front tooth. I was learning to whistle between my teeth, but wasn't there yet. "I'm going to eat your life, Jack," said the troll. I stared the troll in the face. "My big sister is going to be coming down the path soon," I lied. "And she's far tastier than me. Eat her instead." The troll sniffed the air and smiled. "You're all alone," he said. "There's nothing else on the path. Nothing at all." Then he leaned down and ran his fingers over me. It felt like butterflies were brushing my face, like the touch of a blind person. Then he snuffed his fingers and shook his huge head. "You don't have a big sister. You've only a younger sister, and she's at her friends today." "Can you tell all that from smell?" I asked, amazed. "Trolls can smell the rainbows. Trolls can smell the stars," it whispered sadly. "Trolls can smell the dreams you dreamed before you were ever born. Come close to me, and I'll eat your life." "I've got precious stones in my pocket," I told the troll. "Take them, not me. Look." I showed him the lava jewel rocks I had found earlier. "Clinker," said the troll. "The discarded refuse of steam trains, of no value to me." He opened his mouth wide. Sharp teeth, breath that smelled of leaf mold, and the underneath of things. "Eat now." He became more and more solid to me, more and more real, and the world outside became flatter, began to fade. "Wait!" I dug my feet into the damp earth beneath the bridge, wiggled my toes, held on tightly to the real world. I stared into his big eyes. "You don't want to eat my life? Not yet. I'm only 7. I haven't lived at all. There are books I haven't read. I've never been on an airplane. I can't whistle yet, not really. Why don't you let me go? When I'm older and bigger and more of a meal, I'll come back to you." The troll stared at me with eyes like headlamps. Then it nodded. "When you come back, then," it said, and it smiled. I turned around and walked back down the silent straight path where the railway lines had once been. And after a while, I began to run. I pounded down the track in the green light, puffing and blowing until I felt the stabbing ache beneath my ribcage, the pain of stitch, and clutching my side, I stumbled home. The fields started to go as I grew older. One by one, row by row, houses sprang up with roads named after wildflowers and respectable authors. Our home, an aging, tattered Victorian house, was sold and torn down. New houses covered the garden. They built houses everywhere. I once got lost in the new housing estate that covered 2 meadows I had once known every inch of. I didn't mind too much that the fields were going, though. The old manor house was bought by a multinational, and the grounds became more houses. It was 8 years before I returned to the old railway line, and when I did, I was not alone. I was 15. I'd changed schools twice in that time. Her name was Louise, and she was my first love. I loved her gray eyes and her fine light brown hair and her gawky way of walking, like a fawn, just learning to walk, which sounds really dumb, for which I apologize. I saw her chewing gum when I was 13, and I fell for her like a suicide from a bridge. The main trouble with being in love with Louise was that we were best friends, and we were both going out with other people. I'd never told her I loved her, or even that I fancied her. We were buddies. I'd been at her house that evening. We sat in her room and played Rattus Norvegicus, the first Stranglers LP. It was the beginning of punk, and everything seemed so exciting. The possibilities in the music, as in everything else, were endless. Eventually, it was time for me to go home, and she decided to accompany me. We held hands, innocently, just pals, and we strolled the 10-minute walk to my house. The moon was bright, and the world was visible and colorless, and the night was warm. We got to my house, saw the lights inside, and stood in the driveway, and I talked about the band I was starting. We didn't go in. Then it was decided that I'd walk her home. So we walked back to her house. She told me about the battles she was having with her younger sister, who was stealing her makeup and perfume. Louise suspected that her sister was having sex with boys. Louise was a virgin. We both were. We stood in the road outside her house, under the sodium yellow street light, and we stared at each other's black lips and pale yellow faces. We grinned at each other. Then we just walked, picking quiet roads and empty paths. In one of the new housing estates, a path led us into the woodland, and we followed it. The path was straight and dark, but the lights of distant houses shone like stars on the ground, and the moon gave us enough light to see. Once we were scared when something snuffled and snorted in front of us. We pressed close, saw it was a badger, laughed and hugged, and kept on walking. We talked quiet nonsense about what we dreamed and wanted and thought. And all the time, I wanted to kiss her and feel her breasts and maybe put my hand between her legs. Finally, I saw my chance. There was an old brick bridge over the path, and we stopped beneath it. I pressed up against her. Her mouth opened against mine. Then she went cold and stiff and stopped moving. "Hello," said the troll. I let go of Louise. It was dark beneath the bridge, but the shape of the troll filled the darkness. "I froze her," said the troll, "so we can talk. Now, I'm going to eat your life." My heart pounded, and I could feel myself trembling. "No." "You said you'd come back to me, and you have. Did you learn to whistle?" "Yes." "That's good. I never could whistle." It sniffed and nodded. "I am pleased. You have grown in life and experience. More to eat, more for me." I grabbed Louise, a taut zombie, and pushed her forward. "Don't take me. I don't want to die. Take her. I bet she's much tastier than me, and she's 2 months older than I am. Why don't you take her?" The troll was silent. It sniffed Louise from toe to head, snuffling at her feet and crotch and breasts and hair. Then it looked at me. "She's an innocent," it said. "You're not. I don't want her. I want you." I walked to the opening of the bridge and stared up at the stars in the night. "But there's so much I've never done," I said, partly to myself. "I mean, I've never had sex, and I've never been to America, and I paused. "I haven't done anything. Not yet." The troll said nothing. "I could come back to you when I'm older." The troll said nothing. "I will come back. Honest, I will." "Come back to me," said Louise. "Why? Where are you going?" I turned around. The troll had gone, and the girl I had thought I loved was standing in the shadows beneath the bridge. "We're going home," I told her. "Come on." We walked back and never said anything. She went out with the drummer in the punk band I started, and much later married someone else. We met once on a train after she was married, and she asked me if I remembered that night. I said I did. I really liked you that night, Jack, she told me. I thought you were going to kiss me. I thought you were going to ask me out. I would have said yes, if you had, but I didn't. No, she said, you didn't. Her hair was cut very short. It didn't suit her. I never saw her again. The trim woman with the taut smile was not the girl I had loved, and talking to her made me feel uncomfortable. I moved to London, and then some years later I moved back again. But the town I returned to was not the town I remembered. There were no fields, no farms, no little flint lanes, and I moved away as soon as I could to a tiny village 10 miles down the road. I moved with my family. I was married by now, with a toddler, into an old house that had once, many years before, been a railway station. The tracks had been dug up, and the old couple who lived opposite us used it to grow vegetables. I was getting older. One day, I found a gray hair. On another, I heard a recording of myself talking, and I realized I sounded just like my father. I was working in London, doing A&R for one of the major record companies. I was commuting into London by train most days, coming back some evenings. I had to keep a small flat in London. It's hard to commute when the bands you're checking out don't even stagger onto the stage until midnight. It also meant that it was fairly easy to get laid if I wanted to, which I did. I thought that Eleonora, that's my wife's name, I should have mentioned that before, I suppose, didn't know about the other women, but I got back from a 2-week jaunt to New York one winter's day, and when I arrived at the house, it was empty and cold. She had left a letter, not a note. 15 pages, neatly typed, and every word of it was true, including the P.S. which read, "You really don't love me, and you never did." I put on a heavy coat, and I left the house and just walked, stunned and slightly numb. There was no snow on the ground, but there was a hard frost, and the leaves crunched under my feet as I walked. The trees were skeletal black against the harsh gray winter sky. I walked down the side of the road. Cars passed me, traveling to and from London. Once I tripped on a branch, half hidden in a heap of brown leaves, ripping my trousers, cutting my leg. I reached the next village. There was a river at the right angles to the road, and a path I'd never seen before beside it. And I walked down the path and stared at the partly frozen river. It gurgled and plashed and sang. The path led off through fields, and it was straight and grassy. I found a rock half buried on one side of the path. I picked it up, brushed off the mud. It was a melted lump of purplish stuff, with a strange rainbow sheen to it. I put it into the pocket of my coat and held it in my hand as I walked, its presence warm and reassuring. The river meandered away across the fields, and I walked on in silence. I had walked for an hour before I saw houses, new and small and square, on the embankment above me. And then I saw the bridge, and I knew where I was. I was on the old railway path, and I'd been coming down it from the other direction. There were graffiti painted on the side of the bridge. Fuck, and Barry loves Susan, and the omnipresent NF of the National Front. I stood beneath the bridge in the red brick arch, stood among the ice cream wrappers and the crisp packets and the single sad used condom, and watched my breath steam in the cold afternoon air. The blood had dried into my trousers. Cars passed over the bridge above me. I could hear a radio playing loudly in one of them. "Hello?" I said quietly, feeling embarrassed. feeling foolish. Hello? There was no answer. The wind rustled the crisp packets and the leaves. I came back. I said I would, and I did. Hello? Silence. I began to cry then, stupidly, silently, sobbing under the bridge. A hand touched my face, and I looked up. I didn't think you'd come back, said the troll. He was my height now, but otherwise unchanged. His long gonk hair was unkempt and had leaves in it, and his eyes were wide and lonely. I shrugged, then wiped my face with the sleeve of my coat. I came back. 3 kids passed above us on the bridge, shouting and running. I'm a troll, whispered the troll in a small, scared voice. Oro de oro. He was trembling. I held out my hand and took his huge clawed paw in mine. I smiled at him. It's okay, I told him. Honestly, it's okay. The troll nodded. He pushed me to the ground, onto the leaves and the wrappers in the condom, and lowered himself on top of me. Then he raised his head and opened his mouth and ate my life with his strong, sharp teeth. When he was finished, the troll stood up and brushed himself down. He put his hand into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a bubbly, burnt lump of clinker rock. He held it out to me. This is yours, said the troll. I looked at him, wearing my life comfortably, easily, as if he'd been wearing it for years. I took the clinker from his hand and sniffed it. I could smell the train from which it had fallen so long ago. I gripped it tightly in my hairy hand. Thank you, I said. Good luck, said the troll. Yeah, well, you too. The troll grinned with my face. It turned its back on me and began to walk back the way I had come, toward the village, back to the empty house I had left that morning, and it whistled as it walked. I've been here ever since, hiding, waiting, part of the bridge. I watch from the shadows as the people pass, walking their dogs or talking or doing things that people do. Sometimes people pause beneath my bridge to stand or piss or make love, and I watch them, but say nothing. They never see me. Full roll, the old roll. I'm just going to stay here in the darkness under the arch. I can hear you all out there, trip-trapping over my bridge. Oh, yes, I can hear you. But I'm not coming out.